Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Beat Your Addiction with John Giordano. I'm your co-host, Scott Jones. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We got a great show for you today. But before we get started, just a quick reminder that if you like this program, you want to subscribe to it and hit the notification bell so you know when our next shows are coming out. And, of course, share it with your friends and colleagues. This is all about getting a good message out there. And if you want any more information about John Giordano or to contact him, you can go right to johnjgiordano.com. And all of his information is right there, including his publications and his contact information. Right, John?
Right. It's John, the letter J, Giordano.com. Because some people say J-A-Y. So,
well, yeah. You know, we probably should grab that, too, just in case.
You know? You're right.
Yeah. Okay, so johnjgiordano.com. But again, this is Beat Your Addiction, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. And John, first of all, it's good to see you, my friend, and hope all is well with you and your family.
Everything's going really well. Thank you.
Good. And I want to introduce our guest, who's a very special guest. This is somebody that John has been working with for, I want to let him talk about the relationship because he's always had such admiration and respect for this colleague and friend of his, and somebody that I've had the pleasure of meeting several times and certainly have followed her work. This is Dr. Deborah Mash, and she's with Demorex, and I'll let them explain what all that is, but she is the CEO and founder of Demorex. And John, Dr. Mash, take it away.
All right. It's so great to have you on. And people need to know what's going on with plant medicine like Ibogaine. And that's what this is going to be. We're going to be talking about Ibogaine. It's an African medicine it's a magical substance that helps people get detox within 24 hours. I'm going to let Dr. Mash talk about all that. And we've been working together, how long? 20 years at least? Deborah?
I think it's longer than that, John.
Probably longer.
I think
we're as old as dirt. You know? Why don't you tell us all about what's going on and where you're at and how it's progressing?
Well, I want to thank you first, John, for inviting me to discuss Ibogaine today with you and your viewers, and also to thank you publicly for your friendship and to acknowledge the important contributions that you have made to Ibogaine research and to helping to advance this drug as a substance to help patients make a transition to sobriety. Ibogaine has a long history, and my journey with it goes back before 1993, when I first went up to the FDA and asked them for permission to test Ibogaine in humans. And actually, John, it was after we were getting publicity with the announcement that the FDA had approved our clinical trial that you first contacted me to ask me if you could get involved and if you could learn more about this. And again, that emphasizes how you have always been cutting edge and looking at ways to help patients who suffer from drug and alcohol dependence, whether it's doing holistic type of medicine, whether it's using vitamins and nutrients and helping to restore body function. And then in this case, it was the idea that a psychedelic medicine could be a transformative way to help patients break their intractable cycle of abuse.
Yeah, it's an addiction interrupter, I believe we call it. It's amazing watching the clients come to the island of St. Kitts. That's where we used to do our detox, because it is considered a Schedule I drug, and it wasn't yet available in the United States. So we went to St. Kitts, and Dr. Mash had a wonderful, wonderful detox center. And what made it really good is the priority was that it'll be safe, done in a medical context. And that is the most important thing, is safety. And that's what she was concerned about, and that's what she did, and that's how it worked. And we helped so many people. They came in the worst of the worst because they've tried everything else, and then they finally went to Dr. Mash. And here they are, and all of a sudden, after 24 hours, they come out, and it's like a whole different person. You go, this can't be the same person, you know? And I'll let Deborah, you talk about the work. I mean, she's incredible. She works so hard. She cares about the client. It's not about money. It's about helping the human race. And that's what we're all about here. Money's one thing. It's not bad to make money. I'm not saying that's not good, but you have to have a balance in life. Otherwise, it isn't any good. So Deb, tell us more about what's going on. Where you're at.
Actually, John, I always enjoy hearing you talk about the way the patients look, because you work with so many thousands of people. So your perception, your witnessing to what we saw in St. Kitts is always very reinforcing to me, because it was very important that others got to see what we were doing down there. And I think for your listeners, the St. Kitts experience, the reason that we ended up in St. Kitts was, you mentioned money, was because I couldn't fund this. Originally, when the FDA approved us to work with Ibogaine, the plan was that we would run a clinical phase 1 safety and pharmacokinetic study at the University of Miami at the medical school, where I was on the faculty for many, many years. And when we got the FDA permission to go, we got it first in 1993, and then again, we got the full green light from the FDA in 1995. This was an amazing accomplishment, truly, because very few investigators, very few academic investigators, doctors, and universities had a DEA license to work with Schedule I drugs. That was a stumbling block. And then to have FDA permission to go forward with it. There were only a handful of people. And those of us working at the university in Miami were the first, and as I sit here today, the only people to ever get FDA permission to work with Ibogaine in the United States. And there have been few protocols that have advanced in any country outside the United States. So when we couldn't fund it, and remember the patents, the original patents for Ibogaine were held by the late Howard Lutzoff. So Mr. Lutzoff was the one who had the drug supply. He also held the intellectual property. In order to develop a drug through the FDA, or any regulatory agency for that matter, can be many tens, if not $100 million to get through all the stages of regulatory approval. So here we were, we had FDA permission to go forward, but we did not have the money to pay for the clinical trial. And I remember the day when I knew that we weren't going to get money from government, because I went to the National Institute on Drug Abuse to ask them to fund the trial. And Mr. Lutzoff couldn't fund the trial. So we were all dressed up, ready to go, assembled a wonderful collaborative team of people like yourself, John, counselors, addiction therapists, addiction medicine physicians, psychiatrists. We had collaborators around the United States, not only at the University of Miami. So we were really excited to get going, to get in the clinic and to finally test and to be able to show the regulators and also show key opinion leaders that this drug held promise. But as you mentioned, we needed to understand the safety of the molecule. We needed to understand that any risk for Ibogaine, that the benefits would outweigh any potential problem. We had to demonstrate that. So there really wasn't a lot of information, and we were starting from scratch. Now, when we went to St. Kitts, the reason that I went to St. Kitts was the beginning of my entrepreneurial days, right? Because I did what is called a family and friend round, and went and raised money from families and friends, spoke to the university, told them I wanted to do this. And John and I had the opportunity to work with a wonderful psychiatrist by the name of Frank Irvin. And Dr. Irvin, who was in St. Kitts and who I had worked with on other NIH-funded projects, was willing to step in and be a clinical director. I'm not a medical doctor, so we needed to have a clinician at the top. And Dr. Irvin went to government with us, and we got permission from the government of St. Kitts to bring Ibogaine into the country and to set up a treatment center. So it was really an R&D. And John, you were part of that cutting edge again, because we were learning the safety, the medical safety. We had we knew what the FDA wanted to see, and we knew what we had promised the ethics review committees at the university and our discussions with our collaborators at the FDA. We knew what they wanted to see. So we had the kind of medical model mapped out. But in terms of this as a treatment intervention for people in wanting to detoxify from cocaine or opioids or other drugs, and making that transition and developing an aftercare is where your expertise, John, came in, helping to prepare the patients before Ibogaine and then helping them make that transition.
You know what was really cool with Dr. Irving? He was doing the monkey studies on the island. And it was really interesting they were alcoholic monkeys. So they were showing them with families of monkeys together, how they respond. And then they would have different levers, one for water and one for alcohol, and how they would do that. And when they had groups of people together, they wouldn't go towards the alcohol so much. A real interesting study. And we were very fortunate and blessed to have you and Dr. Irving on as well. And what people don't understand is that, look, there's some talk about, well, people died on Ibogaine. Well, look, let me explain something to my audience, first of all. People die in detox, okay? People die when they don't have any safety protocols. They have a lot of people doing Ibogaine in the underground. Now, they mean well. They really want to help people. I understand that. But it goes beyond that. When you don't do things in a medical procedure and you don't do them properly, yes, people can die. And that's with any medication. So it has to have a policy, it has to have a procedure, and done by medical professionals. That is paramount. You know, you can't just give somebody Ibogaine, put them in a hotel room and say, I'll see you in the morning. Because there's certain drugs that interact with Ibogaine, like benzodiazepines and things like that. And, you know, you got to know what you're doing. And Deborah, you want to talk a little bit about that, the rule outs, and especially with people that have dissociative diseases and schizophrenia and things like that, that they're not good candidates for Ibogaine.
Yes, as with any kind of medical intervention, you need to have proper medical clearances. And of course, people, you raise a very important point, John, is that when, we closed St. Kitts and moved back into the United States, and my plan at the time was to develop possibly the metabolite of Ibogaine, nor-Ibogaine, which we haven't talked about on this interview today. But, you have to be guided by the science behind the molecule, and you have to understand the limitations of the intervention. That's why you do clinical trials.
Right.
But Ibogaine has gone to the underground. And there is a vast underground experiment of Ibogaine ongoing today. People, as John said, will go into unsafe settings, some more unsafe than others. And there have been 32 deaths reported in the medical literature that had been attributed to be related to Ibogaine. Now, John raises another very important point. In reviewing those deaths, often there were other issues. People had sick hearts. People took other drugs. John mentioned the drug-drug interaction. Ibogaine undergoes a metabolic clearance that is very complicated. Ibogaine is handled by the body differently depending on the genetics of a person. So you might be a fast metabolizer or you might be a poor metabolizer. So this is one aspect of Ibogaine that needs to be very well controlled. Drug-drug interactions, yes, very important, because Ibogaine may cause what is referred to as QT prolongation. This is a change in the way the heart behaves. And there are many drugs that have QT, that may be QT prolongers, that have been approved for use. One good example in this context is methadone. Methadone causes QT prolongation. This is known, yet methadone is used by millions of people in the US and elsewhere. And so it can be given safely. So we needed to understand the safety of the molecule. We needed to understand how the body metabolized the molecule, and we needed to understand the concentration of Ibogaine in the blood so we could relate it to the dose and the safety for alcoholic patients, for opioid dependents, for cocaine abusers. And that's another good point John made, is that people who come in who have been abusing hard drugs and alcohol have all kinds of things going on. They're nutritionally compromised, which means that their magnesium levels, their calcium levels, their potassium levels in the blood may be altered. They may have damaged their heart. If your heart is not healthy, you are not a candidate for Ibogaine. You need to have a cardiac clearance before you take the drug, and that's what
what was interesting, the way you went about it. We had to put a heart monitor on them. Was just see, an EKG is just a snapshot of what's going on in the heart at that moment in time. But to really get an understanding of what's going on, how the heart is functioning, we did a heart monitor for 24 hours, and then we sent it out, and then we got the results back from the lab. And we checked what's on board, what kind of drugs are on board. We also checked what other things are going on with that patient that needs to be addressed. And then we looked at a psychological profile to make sure that they didn't have any rule outs with Ibogaine. See, that's the proper way to do it. And now when we went to St. Kitts, okay, we did it again, checking them out and making sure that they were a good candidate for Ibogaine. Because this is one of the most important African medicines, I believe, in the century. And the work that Dr. Mash is doing is incredible. But you see, most people don't know about Ibogaine. They have anecdotal information that doesn't match up to what's really going on. First of all, it's not a magic bullet. That's number one. Number two, it is an addiction interrupter, and it gets people, the whole mind changes the way they come out. It's amazing what happens with Ibogaine. My son had anxiety and depression. I took him for Ibogaine, and that's when I did it with him. And I can't even say more about it, that it's an incredible process. It's not a magic bullet. It's not a treatment per se that now you do it, you're done. Okay. It's a beginning, but a good beginning. Not just where people go to detox to come out. I don't even know why they call it detox centers. They should be called them stabilization units, because detox means to detoxify, not put other drugs in its place. So this medication and with Dr. Mash, well, you could talk about noribogaine, which is a molecule that is placed in the neural receptor of the opioid receptor sites that keeps them from cravings and keeps them just moving along and wanting to get help. I could talk forever. You go talk.
Well, again, I enjoy listening to you talk about it, because when I remember, I can visualize the two of us, going to pick up our patients at the airport when they would come in. And they would come to us, John, so sick. And we would watch the American Eagle planes land, and we would be on the second floor watching them walk off the plane. And we could, even though we didn't have pictures of some of our patients who were coming in from different parts of the United States or Europe, Canada, we could identify our people because they looked very bad.
I was writing herd. It was like quite interesting. Imagine what one addict can do to a whole family. We had like sometimes 14 addicts keeping corralled and make sure that they're not going off,
Yeah, no, they working with the groups, and that was the excitement. I think, I was over the medical team and working with the medical doctors and our visiting doctors and our nurses, and making sure that the patients got through the Ibogaine detoxification. But the real magic that we saw in St. Kitts was with our counseling staff. And I didn't always, in fact, rarely got involved in the therapeutic environment that John and the other counselors created for these people. But that's where the magic really began. And John, again, describes this well, because people would come in, you know, we like to say pre-contemplative, contemplative, ready for change, right? The Prochaska assessment scale. Our people came in, and as John pointed out, these are people who were at the end of the road. They had detoxed so many different times. They tried to get clean and sober again and again. Relapse rates really high, banging back a lot of hard drugs for many, many years, wreckage in their lives, wreckage in their families. I mean, this was kind of the end of the road for many of our people.
Yeah, it was the last, you know, hurrah for everybody. And it was kind of interesting working with that type of population, because, you know, they would come in and they would hide drugs. And my job also was to make sure that we got the drugs that they hid, right? I could tell that little funny story. I says, look, does anybody have a dog on the island? They said, well, one of the nurses says, yeah. I said, okay, that's our new drug dog. So the nurse says, well, the dog doesn't know about drugs. I said, don't worry about it. So we had them first come in, and I had the dog. I told all the clients that if you have drugs on you, okay, you catch that, you're going to wind up in jail in St. Kitts, and you're not going to like it. So I kind of scared them that way, because it was true. They can die with this stuff if they do drugs that we don't know about. So I had the dog walk around. The dog picked his leg up. I had to jerk him before he peed on the suitcases. Okay. So one of the kids, when the dog would wear their legs out, I got drugs on me, and it's handed us the drugs. The nurses had to run into the bathroom. They were peeing in their pants. They were crying so hard. So these are some of the things we had on the island that, you know, we did. That was kind of fun in a way. They put a goat in, remember they put a goat in my room?
We flushed a lot of drugs.
Oh my God.
There's no doubt about that.
And they hid it in some unique places. I mean, one had it in the cable in his laptop that he brought. I mean, it's like wild how the ingenuity.
Well, that's why you were so good at your job, John. I mean, let's face it. I mean, you know, we did not want them. We needed to find the drugs. Yep. The illicit drugs and the prescription drugs. We didn't want any prescription pills down there. We needed everything to go. And people traveled with drugs. I mean, you know, it's what you do.
You know, that's what happens with
They were scared.
Yeah. They're scared that it's not going to work. They were afraid, and they want to do their last hurrah. And that's standard for addicts.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
But it was really cool. Why don't we talk about the process that you did on the island? And, you know, how we talked about some of it, about the monitoring and the medical component, but the actual process, like, you know, like I know what we did with the counseling, we prepared them to go into Ibogaine.
Very important. Very important. The pre-dose stabilization. So the pre-Ibogaine stabilization phase was very important. And I used to always say to them, you know, two things: purity of intention, go with the flow.
Right. Intent is key. Setting the intention.
And in fact, John, I am going to ask you to speak about this, not only on this call, but I'm going to invite you to participate in something with us, because I mean, if you're going to design an Ibogaine treatment protocol, exactly what John is mentioning now is extremely important. You want to prepare the patients for that transformative journey. And we did that. We did that in St. Kitts. You did that for us. We did that together. When they did that, they began the process. But I remember in the council, I tell this story all the time, but in the counseling center, John, we had a unit that was the counseling unit. And John and the other counselors would meet individually and in groups with our group setting. And they would put up on the wall of the unit the names of the clients, and then they would start to fill in what they were going to do as part of their aftercare plan. And the thing that really struck me, and even though I saw it many times, every time I saw it, I was just struck by this. Before Ibogaine, there would be their name and maybe one thing written on there. After Ibogaine, the whole thing would fill up.
Yeah, that's right.
It was insane, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
and I couldn't believe it. I'd walk in the counseling unit and I'd look and I was like, my God, what happened here? So you set the, purity of intention. Don't be afraid. Go with the flow. We're going to take care of you in this setting. You're going to be safe. And then when they went, quiet, people stay under the Ibogaine, the visions, which is sort of like they describe as a life review. There may be spiritual content. I remember, John, I think it was one of the rounds that you were on with us where I learned it from you in the group that some of the patients said that this was like a fourth step, completing the moral inventory. And so all these pages would fill up. So we fostered that experience in the clinic. We fostered the Ibogaine journey, the life review, the moral inventory. And then out the clinic, they would come. The next day, they would rest. And then the work with the therapists began.
Yeah, but what we did was really the safety protocols also. What we did is after we helped them with their intent to put everything in the foreground of their mind, so they're thinking about that as they go into their journey. We put them in a bed. We had a nurse by their bed. We had an IV in their arm in case there was any kind of an event that occurred. We had a heart monitor on them to make sure everything is functioning properly while they're under the Ibogaine. And then we would give them a test dose to see how they tolerated. So within 45 minutes, if they tolerated it properly, then we would give them a full dose. And like any other detox, we had a nurse right by their bed in that room. And I mean, the safety protocols were paramount. So after that, then what we would do, they would come out, they would get a little rest, and then we would debrief them on what my job was to see what they saw in their journey and help them to understand what that may mean for their life. And they would have what is known as a cathartic experience and a resolution on these different traumas that they had throughout their whole life. And that gave them a one-up in recovery. Problem what we had was everybody thought they were well. So, we had to convince them that no, this is a beginning, a foundation to move forward. You're not well. You've been sick for many, many years. One day, not going to make it. But what's cool about Ibogaine is that opioids, even methadone, 24 hours. Nobody believed that. We had doctors from all over the world come over there with their clients. They couldn't believe it. They heard it. They wanted to see it themselves.
Yes.
And,
we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it either. Remember? I mean, I don't, you weren't with me on the very first rounds, but you were there shortly afterwards. The first few rounds that we did, I'll go to the grave with. And I can remember Dr. Irvin, who was, classic, if you had to pick a psychiatrist, cast him in a role in a Hollywood movie, that would be Dr. Irvin, the big, tall psychiatrist, very controlled behaviorally with a big beard and the glasses. And Dr. Irvin, I can remember after the second round that we did, so we had the methadone patients on the second round, and Dr. Irvin came in to me, he put his glasses on, slid them down on his nose, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, Deborah, it blocks opioid withdrawals." And he had heard about Ibogaine, prior to us doing it in St. Kitts. And there he was, the true believer. And that was all of us, because all of us were witness to this. We saw the rapid detoxification. We saw the rapid improvement in mood, the antidepressant effects of the drug, and we saw the diminished cravings and desire to use. So I always say people could jump the fence and get out of there and go and score dope. They could have left, and they didn't. They stayed. And they were motivated, to work with you, John.
Right. They had their whole personality seemed to take a flip. I mean, it was amazing to me. Now, there's still a lot of work that has to be done. We know that. Okay. Yes. But, I work in the South Beach Detox right now. Wonderful place that people really care about their clients, but I look at their clients detoxing and I look what our clients were detoxing. It's night and day. You know, I wish we could put Ibogaine into the United States, okay, to detox people, because we're really detoxing them. And it's a spiritual medication. It's not just a drug. You know, they use it for a rite of the Weedy tribe. They use it for a rite of passage. So
Chemical bar mitzvah is what I used to call it.
right. And it's like it goes into your soul. And you meet what we call Mother Iboga. And she, you know, it's a beginning journey. It gives you the knowledge, okay, for the most part, on how to move forward in one's life. But knowledge is power, but without action is worthless. So it's like treatment or anything else. We can help you, give you a map, okay, of guide what to do with your life to help you, you know, become a human being again. But you got to do the work.
You got to do the work. And one of my favorite clients once told us, and the way he put it was, Ibogaine is the high dive of recovery. You're going to get farther into the pool, but you still got to swim when you hit the water.
That's right.
And what, John, you said something very, very fundamental, and that is you've got to convert the knowledge into action.
Without that, you don't have anything.
The Ibogaine shows them, gives them, and working with a therapist, it's doubled down and the efficacy is better. So they have a roadmap, but if they don't put it into practice, if that doesn't translate into action, that they will fail. And this is what will lead them back into relapse.
Well, what's amazing at this time, it's the time of birthing for Ibogaine, I believe. Now people are looking at plant medicine like psilocybin, ayahuasca, and things like that, and they're seeing that it really can help people. You know, the other medications that we use, and the SSRIs and MAO inhibitors and all that stuff. Okay, I'm not saying poo-poo on that, but what I am saying is this. Okay, they were never meant for long-term use. They were meant for short-term intervention, and all of a sudden now the long-term use. And they don't really have, I don't believe, too much research on cross-pollination. In other words, using different medications to accomplish the same results that you want, because the body gets used to this stuff and it starts to diminish the power of the medication. So they have to use something else to counteract that. I mean, it's like on and on. And they're educated guesses. They're not really scientific guesses. Okay, so
I think that's right. That's right, John, is that, you know, I've spent my life as a neuroscientist, neuropharmacologist, and studying the human brain after death. And I've examined the brains of, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of people who have died from drug-related deaths. So I've been abusing cocaine, hardcore, opioids. More recently, we have several NIH grants that I'm participating in, working with some exceptional investigators looking for genetic risk and how drugs alter the brain and ultimately behavior. The excitement about the psychedelic medicines, for me as a neuroscientist, is precisely this idea that you have a window of neuroplasticity, that it actually may be not only bringing about a rapid reset to the neurochemistry of the brain, unlike chronic dosing with the SSRIs, as you mentioned, but you also are turning on those synaptic pathways in the brain that can help heal the brain. And when you abuse drugs long-term, you hurt your brain. You change your brain. You know, there's a lot of changes that we were able to characterize in the brain, not only at the level of the cell and the cell membrane, but also all the way at the level of the DNA. I mean, there's evidence that drugs, especially heroin and other opiates, actually hijack the DNA, cause changes at the level of the DNA within the cell. So, you know, we have new techniques now where scientists can actually profile not only the changes in gene expression, but also changes in the DNA at the epigenetic level in the single cell itself. This is very exciting. Well, these psychedelic medicines, whether it's psilocybin for depression or MDMA for PTSD or Ibogaine as a detoxification from hard drugs like heroin, bring about that change, this reset, neurochemical reset. And the question is, how long does that last? And, what is that window of synaptic plasticity? And how do we work with excellent therapists such as yourself, John, to help patients to make that long-term transition?
Well, what we noticed was when they brought them back to treatment, this is not for everybody. I'm not saying it works for everybody perfectly. I mean, nothing works 100% anyway. But for the most part, it's unbelievable. And what we notice is that their cravings, whether like you said earlier, whether they were a fast metabolizer, slow metabolizer, how their liver was functioning, really set the stage for how long that these cravings would last. Because Ibogaine, which turns into noribogaine, blocks the opioid receptor sites, and it's different for everybody because we're all different human beings. So we all have a different footprint. So it was for anywhere from 30 to maybe 90 days that they didn't have any cravings. And that's unbelievable. Because addicts, as soon as they come out of detox, they're looking to get high.
Guys, we're getting close to the end of the show here, and I wanted to get something out there, if you don't mind, for both of you, Doctor and John. You separated this from what people know about methadone and Suboxone and Subutex and Sublocade and all the things that kind of have poisoned the pool of detox, I think. And you've separated this, and you've shown, and through your conversation, that this is something that deserves a real look. Why all the pushback?
Oh,
I think that's the question people are saying, because when you look up Ibogaine, you get a lot of bad press before you get to read the good stuff. Why is there so much pushback on this?
You want to say, I know why, but you want to, Debbie, you want to talk?
I think there's multiple. I think I'll be curious to hear what we'll let John weigh in on this, but.
Well, let's look at it this way. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent a bush, a plant. They can't patent that.
Well, Demorex has some intellectual property, John. So we have an IP strategy, and obviously Mother Nature's natural products, John's right. I mean, you have to in order to patent a molecule, if you're going to spend, let's put it this way, if you're going to spend all those many millions to get through regulatory approval in Europe, US, Canada, or elsewhere, you have to have some kind of rate of return on investment.
Yeah, well, see,
so big pharma can make money on Suboxone. When I started Demorex to develop Ibogaine, and originally to develop noribogaine, and when I came back in 2017, my plan was to bring both molecules back online, to bring Ibogaine online. We were at the height of the opioid deaths in the United States, and I couldn't stand it anymore. And I looked at myself and said, it's time to finish what you started. And that's when I stepped back into Demorex. But originally we thought we would work with the metabolite precisely because we had the intellectual property, the IP around the active metabolite of Ibogaine. So we had a novelty and an inventive step. It costs money, okay? So I think there is a big barrier because of the money. I think the DEA Schedule I also is a roadblock for many academic investigators to get involved. I think there are those, whether, in the buprenorphine and in the methadone industry, that would not like to see Ibogaine come forward. It's just a hunch, all right? And when you look at when I started Demorex in 2010 with my partners, we looked at buprenorphine was the volume of sales in the United States were about under 300 million. Today, it's over 3 billion.
Wow.
So this is a very big uptick, and key opinion leaders, more and more people are being moved on to substitution therapy, medication-assisted therapy with buprenorphine. And indeed, it saves lives, and it's helped many people. But again, you're replacing one addiction to an illicit drug with another opioid, a prescribed medicine, but you're not clean.
Well,
You're still dependent on an opioid.
what's interesting is this, what people don't understand, it's another opioid. And it's an opioid, okay, replacing an opiate. So, you're still doing opiates. And in the early 1900s, we had a morphine epidemic in this country. So all the scientists and the doctors and all the regulators said, oh, we can do this. And we know what this was? Heroin. Now they were trying to help people with heroin to get off of, I mean, it's just like a joke. But, buprenorphine now, what's happening is that they're putting what they don't realize. We did a research paper on this with Dr. Blum. He's the geneticist who found the addiction gene. And what we found out is long-term use of Suboxone or buprenorphine, okay, it blocks dopamine. And people will start walking around like a zombie. They don't have any sexual desires, that nothing means anything anymore.
So you're talking about managed addiction. You're not talking about managed recovery. You're basically talking about managed addiction,
right,
with these things.
Right. And that's the sad part. And Ibogaine doesn't do that.
Right.
Ibogaine, we get that in the United States, but we're going to notice a big difference in what's happening with clients as far as the relapse rate. So tune in for us to do maybe possibly another one to go more in depth about what we're talking about. And I hope the pharmaceutical companies pick it up.
Well, with our partners at TIE, who I will let the listeners know the last comment. The good news to this story is that we have been granted permission to test Ibogaine in what is called a phase 1/2 design, where we're going to demonstrate the safety parameters for the regulators in a dose escalation arm. And then we're going to take that top dose and we're going to demonstrate what John and I saw with our own eyes. We were going to replicate that in what's called a good clinical practice trial in patients seeking to detoxify from opioids. So, John, we're going to invite you to be part of that effort as well. And I look forward to the next chapter of our journey with Ibogaine.
Absolutely.
Doctor, that's a big deal because they weren't even allowing the entertaining clinical trials in the U.S. And now you're taking those first steps. And congratulations for all your hard work that's happening now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
If there are people listening who want to learn more, they can certainly go to your website, which is demorex.com. It's on the screen. People can go there. But if somebody wants to, is there any way people can make some noise to help in the process here, kind of get behind it, petitions or anything like that? Are there people they should speak to? Should they speak to their doctor or their politician? Or are we not there yet?
You make a really good point about, citizen scientists, if you will. And I think today it's very different than I think when we were growing up, John, where people are learning more about their general health. They're becoming more medically informed. And I do think it's important. I think through the recovery, through the rooms, through the recovery movements, I think it's important to get the message out that Ibogaine needs to be given in a safe way, that you don't take Ibogaine in an unsafe setting, buyer beware, and that we need to support access to this drug molecule. I mean, one of the things that is very interesting that I've thought about is what's called patient's right to try. And I think once we get going and we can demonstrate in our study in the UK, bring that information back into the United States. And then I think, family members and people who are desperate for this treatment will raise that awareness and we can get a buy-in from the regulators in the United States. I want to bring this molecule home. I want to do this work here. I want to see this approved for use in the United States.
Absolutely.
Well, both of you, I know there's parents out there that lose sleep knowing that their children are taking Subutex, Suboxone, and all the others, and just there's no change in their life other than who they're paying for their drugs at this point. And I think they're very happy that there are other things out there. And so learn more. Don't close yourself off to it. And guys, just keep up the good work. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity today.
All right. Well, I want to thank Dr. Deborah Mash again with Demorex, the CEO and co-founder. Contact information's on the screen. Again, we're not going to talk about how long you and her have been friends because I don't want to date you.
It's a good date. You can date me.
It'd be carbon dating at this
Said you have
point,
to
John.
talk to my wife about that.
Carbon dating for both of us.
But there's something happening out there. Don't just accept what's mainstream right now. Always look for something else, and that's where we're going with the Ibogaine right now. So, guys, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for joining us right here on Beat Your Addiction with John Giordano. Again, if you want more information about John and contact information, go to johnjgiordano.com. It's the initial J, johnjgiordano.com. And a reminder to everybody out there, if you like this show, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this with your friends. But for now, I want to thank Dr. Deborah Mash one more time for your time. And I know you're very busy, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you both.
Okay.
We'll catch you next time right here on Beat Your Addiction.
Bye.